I've been occupied by the Japanese 3.5 years. It didn't represent me. There was no human rights. So the Japanese never talk of human rights because they understand the brutality, the cruelties that they inflicted on fellow Asians whom they came to so-called liberate.
Long before he built Singapore into an economic powerhouse, a young Lee Kuan Yew narrowly survived the horrors of World War II. The trauma of those years never left him, and in his memoirs, he was famously blunt about his experience under the brutal Imperial Japanese occupation and uncompromising on the use of the atomic bomb, stating, "I have no doubts about whether the 2 atom bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were necessary. Without them, hundreds of thousands of civilians in Malaya and Singapore, and millions in Japan itself, would have perished." While Lee would later build a close relationship with Japan, he admitted that in the aftermath of the war, watching the architects of his countrymen's suffering navigate defeat left him with a harsh, conflicted duality, stating, "Because of fear and hate arising from the suffering of the occupation years, I had felt the satisfaction of schadenfreude when I read of their hunger and suffering in their bombed and burnt cities." This feeling turned into reluctant respect and admiration as they stoically and methodically set out to rebuild from the ashes of defeat. This is the story of Lee Kuan Yew's experience with Imperial Japan. In 1942, at just 18 years old, Lee experienced one of the most traumatic experiences of his youth. As a show of force, the occupying Imperial Japanese army displayed the severed head of a local man on a spike outside Singapore's most modern building at the time.
The first thing I saw, 2 days after they came in, when I went out to sort of buy some food, were 2 human heads on a pole outside the tallest building in Singapore, and Chinese characters to say, "If you are not well behaved, you will end up here." I thought to myself, if only I had a camera, here was this modern 12-story building, highest in Singapore then, and this medieval scene.
But his closest brush with death came during the Sook Ching Massacre, a brutal cleansing campaign targeting Singapore's Chinese population. Lee himself narrowly escaped the screening process, but others weren't so fortunate. An estimated 50,000 civilians were systematically rounded up, driven to the beaches, and machine-gunned down in cold blood.
About 10 days after the fall, we were told to collect ourselves in certain collection centers. So they said, "Go there." So I said, "I have left my clothes behind." I did not feel good.
My eldest brother, Lee Kuan Yew, being the eldest, he was then about 18, I think, and there were gantry points. Now, the gantry points were manned by Japanese soldiers, where they get all the young males together and register them, and some of them will be sent by lorries to be executed in the Sook Ching.
So I went back and stayed light low for a few days with my gardener. He had a laborer's quarters there, so I billeted myself with him. Second time I went out, they had changed people and they let me through. Well, I was lucky. Those who went on that lorry were taken to the beach and shot. Would have been me.
Today, the Civilian War Memorial stands in the heart of downtown Singapore, a permanent reminder of the terror that shaped Lee's worldview. It was these exact horrors that revealed to Lee the terrifying reality of the Imperial Japanese war machine. Those of my generation who saw the Japanese soldiers in the flesh cannot forget their almost inhuman attitude to death in battle. They were not afraid to die. They made fearsome enemies and needed so little to keep going. The tin containers on their belts carried only rice, some soya beans, and salt fish. Throughout the occupation, a common sight was of Japanese soldiers at bayonet practice on open fields. Their war cries as they stabbed their gunny sack dummies were blood-curdling. For Lee, their fearsome nature wasn't necessarily due to heroism or their famous samurai code, but rather the total indoctrination of the population, stating, "What made them such warriors? The Japanese call it Bushido, the code of the samurai. I believe it was systematic indoctrination in the cult of emperor worship, and in their racial superiority as a chosen people who could conquer all. They were convinced that to die in battle for the emperor meant they would ascend to heaven and become gods, while their ashes were preserved at the Yasukuni shrine in the suburbs of Tokyo."
Why did they succeed? Not because of individual Japanese heroism, but because as a group, they were a powerful force, and they still are.
And the evidence for this was far beyond what Lee witnessed in Singapore. Even after the war was officially over, Japanese soldier Hiru Onoda spent 29 years hiding and fighting in the jungles of the Philippines, killing 30 Filipinos in the process because he refused to believe Japan had surrendered. Additionally, nearly 4,000 kamikaze pilots deliberately crashed their aircraft into Allied ships during the final year of the war, sinking 34 ships and killing around 5,000 sailors. Not even the relentless US firebombing campaign, which leveled entire Japanese cities and killed more civilians than both atomic bombs combined, could break the regime's resolve. And these weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a culture that had been systematically programmed to treat surrender as a fate worse than death. And this is why Lee was convinced that avoiding the atomic bomb would have only triggered a far greater slaughter. As he wrote, had the British re-invaded and fought their way down Malaya into Singapore, there would have been immense devastation. After seeing them at close quarters, I was sure that for sheer fighting spirit, they were among the world's finest, but they also showed a meanness and viciousness towards their enemies equal to the Huns. Genghis Khan and his hordes could not have been more merciless. Allied military planners reached the exact same conclusion. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese mainland, was set to be the largest amphibious assault in human history, dwarfing D-Day. But the true horror lay in Japan's ultimate defensive response, Operation Ketsu-Go. This strategy called for the total mobilization of the civilian population, with everyone ordered to fight to the death. Lacking modern rifles, citizens were armed with hand grenades, swords, kitchen knives, and sharpened bamboo spears. Military officers were deployed to classrooms, even training primary school children in the use of weapons. That was the fanatical landscape an Allied invasion force would have faced, and it is exactly why Lee harbored no doubts that the bombs were a horrific necessity. While Lee would go on to build a strong relationship with modern Japan, what always troubled him most in the relationship was Japan's refusal to face its past. He said, throughout the 50 years since the end of the war, successive Japanese Liberal Democratic Party governments, the majority of leaders of all Japanese political parties, most of their academics, and nearly all their media have chosen not to talk about these evil deeds. Unlike the Germans, they hope that with the passing of the generations, these deeds will be forgotten, and the accounts of what they did buried in dusty records. You see, while Germany confronted its past through public memorials and rigorous education, Japan chose a different path through silence, deflection, and the quiet hope that time would bury the evidence. Even decades later, Tokyo has actively pressured nations from the Philippines to New Zealand to dismantle memorials dedicated to comfort women. And even today, deep geopolitical scars remain over Japan's wartime legacy, most notably surrounding leadership visits to the Yasukuni Shrine, where convicted Class A war criminals are actively honoured. Lee argued that true stability in Asia requires a deeper, more profound reconciliation, stating, "Do what the Germans have done. Acknowledge what you have done. Say sorry." The problem in Asia is that the Koreans, Chinese, and many in Southeast Asia do not believe that Japan is really sorry. Japan is sorry it lost the war. That is the problem. When you say in a ritualistic way, "We are sorry, we apologize," and then the leader goes to the Yasukuni Shrine, it is a never-ending problem. Is it necessary? So why not close the subject? I do not understand this. For Lee, this refusal to acknowledge history was not merely a moral failure, but a warning sign for the future. As he concluded, when they refuse to admit them to their neighbours, people cannot but fear that it is possible for them to repeat these horrors.
You, in fact, believe that it is not impossible that they may once again be a powerful military force with ambitions that could lead them to war.
I wouldn't say exactly with ambitions, but I'm quite convinced that they can become a very powerful military force. And if cornered again the way they were in 1941 with an oil embargo and no exports, rather than curl up and die, they'll fight. It's in the nature of the culture of a people.